Hello there, my name is Brandon. I am an LSAT and bar exam instructor with LSATMax Prep. This is a presentation that's being recorded specially for the PreLaw Society. And so I'd like to thank you for having us present to you. And today what I'm going to be talking to you about is how flaws present themselves on the LSAT. There are common ways that arguments go wrong, and on the LSAT, figuring out how arguments go wrong is one of the most important skills that you can have. So I have a little presentation that I'd like to share with you, and we will get started once I share my screen with you here. Alrighty. Looks like everything's up and running. So let's talk about flaws. Well, flaws are related to arguments. And I know for a lot of you, you are probably just dipping your toe into the LSAT. And so you may not know exactly what the LSAT consists of. But the LSAT is about argumentation, first and foremost. And that makes a lot of sense because it's testing your ability to do the work of law school, which is in turn about the work of being a lawyer. And lawyers make arguments. They construct their own arguments. So it's important for their own arguments to be sound. They also want to attack opposing counsel's arguments. So it's important for them to be able to identify where a weakness is in an argument and to attack that argument. And so this is a critical skill on the LSAT. But before we talk about how arguments go wrong, let's just talk about what an argument is. At its most basic, an argument consists of two parts. There's a conclusion, which is the thing the author is trying to prove to you. And then there's at least one bit of support. When you're a lawyer and you're in a courtroom, they'll call it evidence. When you're making an argument or you're reading arguments on the LSAT, they'll call them premises. But a premise or evidence is just a reason that the author puts forth to try to convince you that his or her conclusion is true. So the conclusion is what matters. The author is trying to prove a conclusion to you. And it's up to us to determine whether or not the evidence that the author gives us for his or her conclusion is good evidence. So that's the basic idea behind a flaw, is we're going to try to figure out whether or not the evidence really supports the conclusion. But you have to ask yourself, how are you going to do something like that? Well, this is the process that you need to be engaged in to be critical of an argument. And I'll talk about how common flaws, there are some ways arguments very commonly go wrong, how you can use them in order to engage in this process. But here's what it means to be critical of an argument. To be critical of an argument, you have to be able to explain how the premises don't actually support the conclusion. The makers of the LSAT, and this is what is hard about the LSAT for a lot of people, serve up things that don't make sense. And they don't make sense because they're illogical. But sometimes your head kind of swims when you're trying to make sense out of something that affirmatively and intentionally doesn't make sense. And for you to make sense of it is to find the flaw, is to figure out what's wrong. So that's what you're trying to do, explain how the premises don't actually support the conclusion. But this is the process that you can engage in order to be able to do that. And it's a very simple two-step process. To be critical of an argument is to accept the premises as true, the evidence, and figure out the conclusion could still be false anyway. If you can do that, if you can give a good reason why the premises might be true and the conclusion could still be false, then you've shown what's wrong with the argument. Because premises are supposed to lead to the conclusion. They're supposed to convince you the conclusion is true. If they don't do that, and if there's a really good reason they don't do that, then that's what's wrong with the argument. That's a very abstract thing. And it can be hard to try to figure out what's going wrong with an LSAT argument by treating it in the abstract. But what is very nice is that on the LSAT, arguments go wrong in the same ways over and over and over again. There are 33 common flaws on the LSAT. About a dozen of them are very common, by which I mean about a dozen of them, you're pretty much guaranteed to see one of these flaws on every single test. And there are some that are so common that they show up multiple times on every single test. If you memorize those flaws, if you are able to identify those flaws, then you can do this process here, being critical of an argument, without thinking too much about it. Because if you find the flaw, then you know what the makers of the LSAT think is wrong with the argument. And that's the task you're being assigned, is to figure out what the makers of the LSAT think is wrong with the argument. This process, identifying a common flaw, one of those 33 common flaws, is critical on these question types. So I'm going to run through them. And these question types are the most common question types, at least in logical reasoning. So logical reasoning is one of the sections of the exam. And this is where you most commonly are looking for those LSAT flaws. Errors in reasoning questions. These are questions that will give you a flawed argument and just ask you what is wrong with the argument. They might ask you why it's vulnerable to criticism, or what is the error in the argument, or what is the flaw in the argument. These are the most common question type on the exam. And all you're being asked to do is to accurately describe what is wrong with the argument, why the premises don't really support the conclusion. So that is a very, very common question type. Let me just point out a few of the other ones that are really, really common. Errors in reasoning are the most common. Strengthened questions come in second. And strengthened questions also have flawed arguments. And it makes sense because you can't strengthen an argument. You can't make an argument better unless you know what's wrong with it to begin with. You just want to find the flaw, figure out what's wrong with it, and then the right answer choice will directly address the flaw and will help to fix it. Some of these other ones, the third most common question type on the exam is what we call strengthen with a necessary premise question. This is where you're being asked to find out an assumption the argument is making. But again, a lot of times what the assumption is doing, the reason the argument is making an assumption is because there's something wrong with it. And if you can identify what's wrong with it, you can see what it's assuming. Putting those questions together along with weaken and strengthen with sufficient premise, all of these are flawed arguments. And if you put those question types together, that's half or more of a logical reasoning section. And all of these questions begin with, your analysis begins with, figuring out what is wrong with the argument. So we've been asked to do just a brief presentation today, 15 to 20 minutes. So we're definitely not going to get into questions on all 33 of those common flaws. In fact, we're going to get into questions on 2 of them. But these are 2 of the very, very common flaws that you are likely to see on test day. And so the way that this is going to work is I'm going to give you an example argument that commits the flaw being committed in a real LSAT question. And then we will look at the LSAT question and see how it shows up on the LSAT. So just 2 flaws today, maybe more if there's another time. So let's think about these arguments and why the premises don't support the conclusion. So this is something the makers of the LSAT love to talk about: risk, car accidents, things like that. So here's my argument, and this is a bad argument, and see if you can figure out why it's wrong before I tell you what's wrong with it. 100,000 people died in car accidents last year, while only 3 died juggling chainsaws. We must conclude, therefore, that driving a car is far more dangerous than chainsaw juggling. You might be looking at this and thinking, that's ridiculous. Well, that's good, and that's the first step, but can you articulate why it is ridiculous? By which I mean, why might these things be true? Tons of people died in car accidents. Very, very few died juggling chainsaws. And yet, those things could all be true, and yet the conclusion is false. So how might it be that driving a car is not more dangerous? That chainsaw juggling is actually more dangerous? Well, here's my explanation of why those premises could be true and the conclusion could still be false. In those premises, we're talking about the absolute number of times each of these things happens. People dying in car accidents, people dying juggling chainsaws. The absolute number when it comes to car accidents is higher. But when you talk about something being more dangerous, what you don't realize is that you're actually talking about percentages. If something is dangerous, you have a greater percentage chance of being injured by that activity or dying from it. Here, we're just talking about dying from an activity. But when you're talking about how dangerous something is, you've wandered into the world of percent. And so this is actually a percent versus amount flaw. We have a premise about the amount, we have a conclusion about a percentage, and you can't do that. And here's why you can't do that. Here's the problem. Let's say, okay, sure, 100,000 people died in car accidents last year. Well, let's say that was out of, I don't know, 1 million trips. What that means, 100,000 out of a million, means you have about a 10% chance of dying. Not great. But let's say with this chainsaw juggling thing, only 3 people died. But let's say only 3 people engaged in that activity over the course of the year anyway. If 3 out of 3 people engaging in an activity are dying, your chance of dying is much, much higher. And in fact, here it is a 100% chance. So this is why these things could be true. Sure, this is a bigger number than this. And yet this thing is false. It is more dangerous because this guy is actually smaller than this guy. So this is a percent to amount flaw, and that is the problem with this argument. Now that we know how these flaws work, let's have a look at this real LSAT question over to the right. I'll read it through. If you want to pause this video and try it on your own, feel free to do so. Over the past 20 years, skiing has become a relatively safe sport due to improvements in ski equipment. There has been a 50% drop in the number of ski injuries over the last 20 years. Clearly, however, there have not been decreases in the number of injuries in all categories, as statistical data readily show. For although broken legs and ankle injuries have decreased by an astounding 90%, knee injuries now represent 16% of all ski injuries, up significantly from the 11% of 20 years ago. So this is a lot going on here. 20 years, 50% drop, 90%, 11%, 16%, 20 years. My gosh, how do we keep all this straight? Well, what you will learn before you start learning how to be critical of arguments is just learning what are the pieces of the argument and what's important. We have the conclusion, and what's important about an argument on the LSAT is the premise and the conclusion. How do I make that move? This, where I say clearly, however, this is my conclusion. There have not been decreases in the number of injuries in all categories. Here's some statistical data. Remember when I was talking about evidence for a conclusion? Statistical data is very often evidence for a conclusion. So it's a premise. Then we get this stuff after although. That's the makers of the LSAT giving you some padding that you can read right past, because that's not supposed to support the conclusion. What is supposed to support the conclusion is actually this very narrow band of information down at the bottom. Knee injuries now represent 16% of all injuries, up significantly from the 11% of 20 years ago. So this argument can be boiled down like this. The percentage of knee injuries has risen. Therefore, in at least one category, knee injuries, the number of injuries must have risen as well. If you could see that this is what's going on here, they're talking to you about percent in the premise, they're talking to you about number in the conclusion, you already know what's wrong with this, and you don't have to do the math. But since it's my job to teach this and why this is a bad argument, I'm going to show you why the math doesn't work. And we are going to find out that this is a very, very bad argument. So here's what's going on. Over the past 20 years, there has been a 50% drop in the number of ski injuries overall. So let's say 20 years ago, there were 200 ski injuries. So this would be then, kind of cutting it close to the top here, aren't I? Why don't I give myself a little bit of room? So back then, let's say there were 200 injuries overall. And they tell us there is a 50% drop. A 50% drop from 200 injuries means now there are 100 injuries. The author of the stimulus says, aha, look what happened. Knee injuries were 11 20 years ago, and now they are 16%. So what we're saying is, okay, knee injuries were 11% of the injuries back then. I know we're all going to law school because we don't do math, but 11% of 200 is 22 knee injuries overall. 22 knee injuries. Now, oh my gosh, it's up to 16%. So clearly there are more knee injuries now, are there not? Actually, 16% of 100, I feel like we can definitely do this one, is just 16 knee injuries. And so really what we have here is, this is the premise. We went from 11% to 16%. The conclusion was the opposite of what we got. The conclusion was supposed to be that this number, 16, is bigger than this number, 22, but it is not. So this is exactly how you show that, sure, your premises are true, and yet your conclusion is false, false, false. Luckily on the LSAT, we don't have to do this math. We just have to find the answer choice that correctly describes the math. So what we're looking for is an answer choice that says something like, it treats percent as evidence of amount. A change in percent as evidence of a change in amount. There is an answer choice that looks something like that. One of the kind of arts of the LSAT is to find the answer choice that looks like what you're looking for. The right answer to this question is D. It assumes that an increase in the proportion, that's the percentage of knee injury, rules out a decrease in the numbers. It does presume that, and you cannot do that. If you identify this as a percent to amount flaw, the words proportion and number are just the makers of the LSAT being very good with synonyms. So that is a percent to amount flaw. Before we go, I'm going to teach you about one more flaw, and we will have a question on it. So again, why don't the premises support the conclusion? How might the premises be true, and yet the conclusion is false? So here's my argument, and it's a rude one. You said you'd take me out to dinner, but now you're saying you don't have enough money for the all-you-can-eat diamond-encrusted lobster at Shea Rich Guy. So I guess I'll go hungry tonight. I'll leave the rest of that part of the conclusion out. So again, we are being critical. Let's accept this is true. You said you'd take me out. Now you're saying you don't have enough money. Why might it still be false that we are going hungry tonight? What is wrong with this argument? Why don't the premises lead to the conclusion? Well, here's why. In most places that I know, at least most places with a place that you can buy lobster, the place that you can buy lobster is not the only place to get something to eat. In fact, in most cities, towns, places, rural places, there are many places to eat. And if you don't eat at one, you can just go eat at another. So the fact that you're not eating at one place, at Shea Rich Guy, does not mean you cannot go eat somewhere else. This argument fails to eliminate alternatives, which is a very, very common flaw in the LSAT. It's just forgetting something. It's forgetting all the other restaurants or cooking something at home, all the other different ways that we could feed ourselves aside from having the diamond encrusted lobster at Shea Rich Guy. So again, it's called failure to eliminate alternatives, and it is all over the LSAT. Now let's have a look at a question that fails to eliminate alternatives. Researcher, every year, approximately the same number of people die of, I think this is iatrogenic disease, that is as a direct result of medical treatments or hospitalization, as die of all other causes combined. Therefore, if medicine could find ways of presenting all iatrogenic disease, the number of deaths per year would decrease by half. Therefore, introduces the conclusion. And this is the premise. Every year, the same number of people die of iatrogenic disease as of all other causes combined. Well, if we're stopping people from dying of these diseases, and if they make up more deaths than all of the other ones combined, then that's just math, isn't it? Isn't it the case that if we present these deaths from iatrogenic disease, that we're going to save lots of lives? You might hope that's the case, but there could be a very good reason that these premises are true. People die lots of them every year from iatrogenic disease, and yet the conclusion is still false. In other words, cutting these deaths from iatrogenic disease is going to reduce deaths less, or perhaps even not at all. So why doesn't the premise support the conclusion? Well, here's the problem, which is the fact that somebody doesn't die of one cause just does not rule out that they won't die of another cause. And this iatrogenic disease is happening to people who are already in the hospital. So what you can imagine is that even if we save these people from iatrogenic disease, it is entirely possible that they will die of something else, maybe the condition for which they were hospitalized to begin with. So knowing that the argument fails to eliminate alternatives, and that is a very common flaw, we need to find the answer choice that's going to identify that. So looking at our answer choices here, we're looking for something that says you haven't eliminated all of the alternatives. In other words, people could die from something else. And there is an answer choice that looks just like that. That answer is answer choice C. People who do not die of one cause may soon die of another cause. So this argument fails to eliminate alternatives, and that happens over and over and over again on the LSAT. And when you see it happening, you have the answer. That is all the time we have today for these flaws. These are just a few. If you learn these two, you will already be ahead on the LSAT. So on behalf of TestMax Prep, once again, I would like to thank you, the PreLaw Society, for allowing us to present to you. I hope that this has been useful for you, and I wish all of you watching this video the best of luck on the LSAT, in law school, and in your legal careers. Take care.